Okay. I, I think the Instagram is working this time, but this time I somehow scheduled the broadcast for 10 a.m. instead of 9. Like, so anybody who saw that pop up and knew that was coming, I'm an hour off. I'm just figuring shit out.
It's okay.
It's all good. This is interesting. So now I get to see what a live broadcast looks like on Instagram.
Do you have Instagram up? I have Facebook up.
I have both, but it looks weird. Like I can't see it looks like it's phone shaped on Instagram.
Oh yeah, it does do phone shape. Yeah.
So people can't see anything besides this big line between us.
Well, we'll go in like really close here.
Okay. If we just do one of us, we'll go. If it's just me, I can do that. But like, oh well, we're figuring shit out. Oh my God. Today is the Jesus episode, which is so on the nose and very evangelical seeming. Like, it's funny how much Jesus makes people cringy just saying the name like that. But this week was our kickoff week. We're talking, I shared a mystical experience on Monday, because Monday's for mysticism. Then we introduced the word. Wednesdays are for the word. So cheesy. And then today, Friday is for friends. So we talk about a figure or someone who kind of embodies that theme. And we're talking about Jesus because, probably the most popular person on earth. It's easy to take him for granted and assume you know some stuff about him. So we're talking about how Jesus is subversive or not. That's kind of the topic. And so
that's kind of the topic.
Yeah. And so everyone who is watching, and whether you're watching on Facebook and can see our faces, or Instagram and can't see anything besides this line in the middle, or
I'm trying to lean in.
Yeah. Let's try to. It's like we're just kind of like, hey, hi, we're like on other sides of a wall. So feel free to posit your observations or questions, those of you who are watching. And a reminder, I'm going to do this at the beginning here. So we're CPI as a nonprofit is trying to raise $20,000 this fall between now and basically Christmas. And we're also trying to gather 25 new sustaining members, people who give monthly in a certain way. So you can go to our website, prophetikimagination.org, for more information. It's important. If you don't know what the hell we do, because all you've seen is our memes or maybe this, if you go to our website, you can find out more about what we do. The internet stuff's important. Social media stuff's important. That's why, Kalie, that's her gig, like doing the social media and digital outreach stuff. But that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg, especially what we're hoping to do in the coming year and beyond that. So go to our website and look at that. So did you have a accept Jesus into your heart moment when you were a youngin'?
I don't know if it was accept Jesus in my heart moment, because like I grew up in church, and I shared on Monday like my camp experience where I decided to go into ministry, and that was probably the most accept Jesus into my heart moment that I had. But yeah, like it's kind of weird being a kid that's in a Christian family and going to church like all the time, and then still having to be told that you still need to accept Jesus in your heart, and you're just like, what was happening before? But also my denomination did believers baptism, where like you're not a Christian, your sins aren't forgiven until you're baptized.
What was your denomination as a kid?
The Independent Christian Church.
So independent. Free thinkers.
Oh yeah.
I was baptized twice by an ousted charismatic Mennonite minister. And so, which for those of you who know Reformation history, Anabaptist, that movement that includes Amish and Mennonites and Hutterites, Anabaptist means rebaptized. So whenever I'd get Mennonites who are from an ethnically Mennonite background, as I think about it, I'm like, wait a second, Doctor, I'm more of an Anabaptist. I've been rebaptized. What you got? But yeah. So that's the reason I asked the question about accepting Jesus into your heart is because that's kind of what we think about it. Jesus is kind of fulfills this utilitarian function. There's like this angry sky father who wants to beat the shit out of us or throw us into a fire pit. And then Jesus is like, no, and then accepts it. And Jesus is somehow God and somehow dude at the same time. It's kind of confusing. There's creeds about it to help us figure it out. It doesn't help. And then, but if we kind of like engage in some sort of sacred, secret ritual of some sort, Jesus accepts the wrath. And so we can go to the happy place when we die. Like most people who are very thoughtful wouldn't kind of like be so crass about it, but that's functionally what a lot of people think. And so then the idea is like, well, how does it make you different? It's like, well, because there's some inner magics, because Jesus is bouncing around in there and he changes you from the inside out, helps you be more loving and compassionate. But that's not what evangelicalism has done societally.
Not really. I mean, I guess there's like this idea that that if like that whole penal substitutionary atonement idea, which is basically what you just described, is true, then yeah, I said penal. Yeah. You can't say that on live. Okay. Yeah. But I lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry.
There's like this idea that it like ontologically changes something about you or about humanity, and it turns out that's not actually true because terrible people all throughout history have believed in Jesus. So
yeah, and sometimes very emotive ways of like crying and accepting Jesus and like giving their lives to Jesus. You can do that and still be a horrific person. So I mean, it really raises the question of like, who was Jesus, and is it possible to talk about who is Jesus in some sort of mystically present sense in a way that is intelligent and thoughtful and realistic and corresponds to reality? Now, it's interesting for me, like when I'm arguing with usually evangelicals, but different conservative-minded Christians, like because I really identify with Jesus in a very profound way, in a mystical present sense kind of idea, which I realize is can be weird for people. But like my experience isn't that I somehow broke away from Christianity or deconstructed. It's that I've been going deeper. That's how it feels like from the inside. So when I'm talking to these evangelicals who are like trying to throw Jesus at us, Jesus at me, I'll notice they always refer to Jesus in the past tense, and I'll call people on that. Like, wait a second. I thought the whole point of this for you was that you believe in Jesus' resurrection from the dead and his conquering sin so that you can be free. But you're talking about Jesus as though he's a historical dead figure, and I'm not. So who's the Christian here? Like, I'll do that kind of mess with people, not to one-up them in some sort of like, I'm real Christian and you're not, but more of a, I don't think you are coherent and consistent about what you believe at all. Which there's a lot of that going around, especially with Jesus. Yeah. So historically, like, okay, so I'm going to pull in, I wish I had thought of this beforehand and pulled this up. But there was a commenter yesterday, I think on Instagram, right?
Yeah.
Was that Instagram?
Yeah. I deleted the comments, and I'll explain that, I guess, in a moment.
Yeah, and it makes sense, like in wine. So we get people who just, I don't know how they find our pages. Usually maybe a friend of theirs likes something we say, and so it pops up in their feed, and they're like, wait a second. This is a heretical site, and I got to speak my mind. It's almost always a white dude. I got to speak my mind. And so the meme was, what was it? It was like kind of, there was a trans flag in the background.
It was the progress flag with just the verse where Jesus says, if they hate you, remember, know that they first hated me, or whatever the actual like word for word is. And yeah, like that was intentional. We put that verse like on the progress flag to be like, Jesus stands with the oppressed, which includes the queer community. So
So there's a
they
lot
did.
there's a lot of theology behind that move of slapping that verse on that flag, even though it would seem clunky to people and it wouldn't make sense to them. Like, we're thoughtful about that shit. So you threw that up there, and then some dude.
Yeah, some dude just said that the flag represented sin, and I pushed back at first, and then I realized, you know what, this isn't worth it, and I'm just going to delete these comments because, like, here's the thing: we don't exist to argue whether or not queerness is ethical or not. We obviously think it is, but we're also not going to platform bigoted ideas. So instead of debating on our platforms and allowing them to have a piece of our platform, I'm just gonna, from now on, I'm just deleting. Like, it's not worth it.
No, and then we get this stuff like Naima Teak we had a meme recently because he's a Palestinian liberation theologian.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to be a Palestinian liberation theologian, then you're going to get people coming just talking shit about. I think someone talks shit about Islam. It's like, wait, this is a Palestinian Christian, and then someone also is like, this guy's an anti-Semite because of Israel. Like, there's a lot of that shit. So people will just dive into the controversy. But this idea that somehow Jesus claiming Jesus as some sort of in some kind of way, as though Jesus stands against sin. It's holding to some sort of purity that includes like one man, one woman, like critical race theory is sin, like that kind of way of thinking. Let's just dive into we're not going to go over all the four gospels, but you really don't see that posture from Jesus.
You see actually
Jesus starting out with this manifesto after being tempted in the wilderness by the devil, saying, I have come to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. The Spirit of the Lord is on me. Recovery of sight for the blind, set the oppressed free. This is really a liberatory message. And then Jesus just started doing that.
Yeah. And like you start with the book of Matthew, where like there's this prophecy that Jesus is going to come, and it says that he will save his people from their sins. And like we read that with like this idea, this like theological developed idea over the last 2,000 years, where we put baggage on the term sin.
Is this really theological construct that is so developed that anytime you see that word in scripture, it means all that thing. And that's not the hell what's going on. That's not what it is.
To me, this is my understanding. Matthew's actually using the word sin a little bit more metaphorically, because Matthew's actually a very anti-Roman Empire book. If you pick up on what he's doing. And he can't just say, yeah, the Messiah came to liberate people from the empire. But what he can say is that he came to save them from their sins. And Matthew pulls on the Old Testament all the time, right? What is the sins of the people? If you read the Old Testament, the sins of the people are the nation not following Yahweh. And they are then put into oppression and are conquered by different empires because of their sin. So save people from their sins is saving them from the consequences, which is oppression under the empire. So even when we talk about sin in, say, the book of Matthew, it's actually used in a way where it's subversive against an oppressive empire.
This is lots of people, and I need to redo this because I did this whole series on the spirituality of empire. I break down a lot of stuff, but it was the pre-coming out me, and so I need to. And I've developed more thoughts on how to flesh out these ideas a little bit more. But one of the things that happens throughout, especially beginning with the Reformation and onward through the Enlightenment, is this continual collapsing of categories of religion and spirituality into a smaller and smaller sphere, so that it exists now as an individual kind of thing, so that sin and these categories are seen entirely in interpersonal moralistic terms. And so that now when you start talking about social sin, people are like, oh my God, you're a liberal. Like, they just go there as though we're making this up. I'm like, that is not this individual moralistic kind of primary framework, is not how it's portrayed throughout Scripture. And this idea of sin is a it's just a varied idea, like about just, all these ways that we can fuck things up. Yeah. You could just translate it as fucked upness, which is a much more broad and expansive term in the English language. That's not like buried under mountains of theology. Like, you can say, like, every time you see the word sin, say fucked upness. You're like, oh, okay. I wonder what kind of fucked upness they're talking about right here.
Well, you got to go figure that part out.
Fucked up.
It's like there's, depending on what you're reading, they're talking about something else, especially in the New Testament. Like, the New Testament uses the word hamartia, which it just really means like a general sense of wickedness. And that is not descriptive. Like, you got to really go figure it out. The book of John, sin, the author of John actually defines what he means in the entirety of the book, which is unbelief. Like, he literally says that sin is unbelief. And if you read that context into the book of John, like, it changes a lot of it.
Got a couple comments here. Tammy writes, love this conversation.
Hey, Tammy.
Hey, I'm glad you like it. And thanks for the comment.
Tammy was a fellow seminary person. Has been she's an awesome person. I've gone to her like a lot with like my own personal stuff, and she's always been there. And she's amazing. Awesome.
Great.
Yeah.
I'm glad. Yeah. I like when, I love when anybody comments, but if it's someone we know, it's kind of nice. Arnett writes, what was the exact word you used to begin with? Is Jesus subversive or not? How is he not? How could he not be not? Reading the Gospels, they are a litany of subversion. Yes, I mean, you have Mary, like,
Mary's song is
like tearing the powerful from their thrones. You have this incredible thing, and like, yes, we don't want to push it and say that Jesus was engaging in what we think of as activism or organizing work the way we think about it today. But what was happening was Jesus was coalescing people around what does it mean to be the people of God in this entirely different way, that he begins to enact and tear down different confronting directly these systems of oppression with these sort of prophetic speech acts and actions that are just so charged that they have people start conspiring to murder him. It's not because this idea, like, they killed Jesus because he preached love. Like, that's true if you have a very deep and profound sense of the word love. It wasn't that everyone wanted to be a dick and Jesus was like being really too nice. It's that Jesus's idea of love was subversive. This reign of God, the way that we're supposed to be with one another, that confronted the socio-economic and religious systems.
And he took on the idea of hierarchies like all over the place, especially like he takes on patriarchy. Every single time he talks about marriage, he's putting men down for the fact that they are elevated in a patriarchal system. Like, Jesus actually never says anything positive about marriage. He's just always like, you guys are fucking up left and right. Like, literally, like, you men are messing up. And then, I mean, that's why like Matthew 19, where people try to use it against homosexuality, saying, see, Jesus pointed out that marriage is between a man and a woman. Okay, he quoted the Old Testament, great, However, he just made a bunch of cis heterosexual guys say, oh, what's the point of being married? So your interpretation of what Jesus is saying had better make these cis het guys scared of marriage. And if your interpretation isn't going there, you're not reading it right. Because there's no way that these cis het guys are going, what, you think marriage is between a man and a woman? Why would anyone get married? No, that's not what Jesus is saying.
That's not what Jesus is saying. It's amazing how people do this. Like, it's the render to Caesar what is Caesar's coin thing. It's like, look, Jesus is saying Caesar's a good thing. That's not what's happening there.
That's not what's...
Just because Jesus mentions Caesar doesn't mean he's legitimizing Caesar. There's this way of interpreting that people just want to go on the surface level to say, like, because Jesus mentions it, he's endorsing it. Like, no, he's bringing it up for a reason. He's bringing it up for a clear reason. These sorts of things.
Also, it's not helpful to like make change and then be arrested for tax evasion, right? Like, it's not helpful. I mean, you can make that same point out of the render onto Caesar. Is like, if he's actually trying to do something, maybe being arrested for not paying taxes is kind of a goal. Like, you kind of need to stay out of jail for that.
It's one of these things I want to revisit and rewrite, but like over a decade ago, I wrote a little book called That Holy Anarchist that kind of talks about the anarchic impulse in the Gospels and Jesus's ministry, and then throughout church history. And I would nuance it more because my understanding of politics and economics has grown. But all these ways Jesus is really naming some sort of abstracting, alienating system or idea or myth. And then he confronts it directly in a way that's profoundly human in the best sense of that word, through these miracles. And so when we don't read, my whole subversion experience, like when I was going to go into, I wanted to go to seminary. I didn't know how to pay for it. And it was right before 9/11. And 9/11 happened. And I saw all the people around me. And I was super freaking conservative, really being excited about war. And it troubled me. Right. And so I was planning on going into the Air Force to pay for seminary. I started feeling troubled. And I thought I'd sit down and read Luke, which was my favorite gospel. And in one sitting, I realized, fuck. I've been turning Jesus into a formula. I think maybe I'm a pacifist and capitalism is bad. All that happened in one sitting with Luke because it's so dripping with subversive counter narrative to the way that the empire works. If you read through Luke and Acts as like a part one and a sequel, you really get these themes of Jesus really pushing against our economic assumptions, our understanding of what it means to be family and relate to one another, patriarchy, the category and idea of sin, what is authority, what is love. It's just there's just so much topsy-turvy flipping going on.
And there's also, like, especially in the book of Acts, but it's a main theme in Luke as well, is like this continuous pushing of who gets to be part of the kingdom of God. On top of that, so it's like it's subverting and then like extending the kingdom of God, and like it goes like gender diverse people with the eunuch. There's like the Roman centurion, which is not a Jewish person, like all the way up till you end up with Paul talking to all these Greeks that are polytheistic, and like it just keeps extending the kingdom like to more and more people. And I think that, like, it's kind of funny, like people like conservatives we take the Bible literally and like think that, and they'll say like the book of Acts just ends because we're living in the 29
Acts 29.
Acts 29. And it's like, well, all right, well, if we're going to continue the storyline, then we need to keep going on this idea of literally everyone gets to be part of this thing. But you're going to be like, nope, here's the cutoff at
It's very universalistic in a way that is counter-imperial, and it gets co-opted pretty quick. With the accumulation of wealth of the bishops, and then Constantine saying, "Well, I need to shore up my authority base, so I'm going to woo this." People blame Constantine, but the Christian
it was
leaders
already
were becoming, it was getting so fucked up. And so he just grabbed a power base is what he did with that. And you see this development kind of that universalizing impulse. If you can just subvert it a little bit in the bad way, you can turn Christianity into a great imperial religion. That's kind of part of how that works.
We've seen that in our own history with like the accumulation of Christianity to gain power in like the Reagan administration, which we're still dealing with now.
Yeah, because the way religion and Christian supremacy works, in a number of ways, but one of the ways it does that is it gives you moralistic leverage to control people's individual behavior in a way that is harder to do without some kind of religious system.
Yeah.
So, and then of course that begets other things. So white supremacy is a child of Christian supremacy. Cis heteronormativity. I mean, patriarchy pre-existed, but like the idea of tying it to sexual purity, that's a child of Christian supremacy. So that the idea that all these things that become coercive, oppressive systems are rooted in an interpretation of the life of Jesus and the implications is disturbing. It's just so messed up. Liz asks a great question. Hey, Liz. I would be interested in your thoughts on what discipleship looks like in 2022. I think that's too big of a question to tackle now, but I want to be thinking about that because that really is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
As we continue,
I think that's really what we try to figure out. Also at CPI, what would discipleship kind of look like if we took spirituality to be subversive? So yeah, we'll be developing that probably throughout this series and beyond, I'm sure.
And one of my favorite books is a kind of a little touchstone kind of to begin kind of interrogating that is, I refer to this book all the time. It's called Beyond Mere Obedience. I think it's been republished under the name Creative Disobedience. It's by Dorothy Zola. She writes about how we have, it's where she coins the term Christofascism, which people use a lot now and they're misusing it, at least in this Dorothy Zola way. But she says that, somehow obedience has become a virtue in and of itself, which is dangerous. And so linking that to some sort of God or Christ becomes this sort of worship of obedience or worship of authority. And then to the point where you can just take Jesus out of it and you still have that form of Christofascism. It's just how that works. So now, even in secular societies, there's this worship of authoritarianism that happens. And really, that's what it is. Like, people just want to figure out what the top thing is on the pyramid of power and worship that, and then let's just name that Jesus. And so discipleship, to me, needs to be unhooked from the idea of obedience. Obedience as the primary metaphor for understanding discipleship is problematic. And what Jesus was not going for, he's like, I call you friends now. Don't lord over one another. I'm going to send my comforter to guide you into truth. Those are all very subjective, anti-authoritarian ideas that are at the heart. Love one another. Love of God is linked with love of neighbor. These are very subversive, flipping the hierarchy ideas, and we got to break our habit of worshiping authority.
We actually do have a post coming on how ethics is actually determined by those in power, as opposed to coming from another, rather than coming from another source, which is beneficial for maintaining power, because if you can decide what is an ethical means of protest, then you can say, oh, they overstep their bounds, so we don't have to take them serious.
They're a bunch of animals. I mean, I heard this all the time, in every protest movement I've been a part of, that comes out. Well, I'd be tempted to care about, black people being murdered by the cops, but I don't agree with their methods. I'm like,
sitting during a national anthem. Yeah, because that's the same level of violence. Like,
To me,
I'm sorry, if standing for the national anthem is more important than a human's life, you're not worshiping God. You're
no,
worshiping a song, and that's pretty dang evil. I'm just gonna say.
no, and this is fun. Like I remember one time we shut down, we blocked the transit going into the Twins opener one year for Black Lives Matter stuff. It was kind of a collaborative thing between Black Lives Matter in Minneapolis and then the Catholic Worker.
Nice.
And so we were doing this thing, and there's this guy who was just berating my friend who was there with his baby in a stroller. And I was like, "Hey, Brett, can I just step in here?" And he was like, "Yeah, I was just telling your friend here that, like, look, if you want to win people over to your ideas, you got to bluff." He started going, like, "Wait a second, win over what idea?" And he was like, Black Lives Matter. And I'm like, "Well, are you saying that would be you'd be against police murdering people except for this now?" It's like, "No, I'm totally on board." I'm like, "Oh, so what we're doing is not deterring you from the cause. You're on board already." Like, no, but you're not going to win over. Like,
Yeah.
you're just. I don't think this is about what you say this is about.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I've gotten that from family.
if
Like,
you raise the question of like maybe the police shouldn't murder people, if you raise that question, people will think about it. That's kind of the whole point of shutting things down, is to make
yeah,
people think about it. It doesn't have to
it's
be an
kind of,
elegant, like, I don't know.
yeah. It's kind of like when people bring up the queer agenda. You're like, all right, what is the queer agenda? What are we doing? I mean, I was personally at our annual meeting where we set the agenda, so I do know the details. But what do you understand the details to be?
The queer agenda is a Bed Bath and Beyond in every city. It's part of the queer agenda.
And
Sparkly
being
clothing.
free to watch.
A comment from Arnett. Jesus was a great one for inverting troubles on people and turning interpretations around.
There's a correction. It's tropes, inverting tropes.
Oh, sorry, inverting tropes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. Thanks for pointing that out. Inverting tropes on people and turning interpretations around against themselves, primarily to make people think, as far as I could tell. It's a beautiful technique, and if I remember correctly, a lot of what Jesus is supposed to have said in the Gospels had actually been said before by Hillel. Like, this is the thing. Well, not just Hillel. Like, Jesus was drawing upon a deep prophetic tradition of wisdom, and and elevating it. Mm-hmm. Like, to me, he's embodying it in this provocative, beautiful way. But it's not like Jesus just made shit up. This was all part of that prophetic tradition of which Jesus is part of that lineage. And you can say that and believe that and still think Jesus is God if you want. Like, you don't have, those aren't mutually exclusive terms. But he's drawing upon this depth. And yeah, Jesus is a trickster. He's subverting people. He's not just being clever. He's like exposing the contradictions, as Marx might say. Liz says, grateful for the work you're doing on that question. Thanks. That
was on discipleship. Yeah.
Yeah. We're past time. And
we're past time.
My dissertation class that I'm waiting for. But thanks for the comments. And next week, let's see if I can just give people a teaser of what we're talking about next week.
I don't even know if I know what we're talking about next week.
Yeah. So next week, deconstruction. So I'll be sharing my experience of trying to renounce Christ, and our figure on Friday will be Simone Weil. So that'll be a fun one. And in the meantime, just a reminder: please donate if you can to the work we're doing. And if you don't know what the work we're doing is, or you're curious about how to give a donation, propheticimagination.org. There should be a pop-up on the page that will kind of tell you what's what. We'll see y'all next week. Tell all of your friends and family.
Especially your family, especially your conservative family.
Yeah, I don't mind having some like grumpy people commenting. That'd be fun.
Yeah, just DM these videos to them.
There's a couple.
I mean, they're already
trans
sending
women
the
talking about Jesus.
yes,
Send them a video.
they're already sending their QAnon videos to you. You might as well send them these videos, right?
Yeah, it's just like, you know, they send you a PragerU, you send them this.
Yeah,
You know,
no.
quid pro quo.
Yep.
Well, see y'all next week, everybody. Happy Friday.
Bye.